Back on MorningLine, we're coming to you live here from News Channel 5, The Plus. Nick Barris along with Clint Kelly, malpractice attorney. The number on the screen, 737-7587. You know, some mornings the phones just explode. Other times it's slow going. It gets busier later. So if you have a question or comment for Clint, line's open now. So I'll wait for the calls to come in. And as we go to that, I'm just curious. Are there, you know, I always like to ask you, and you, I know, observe cases across the country, big ones. We've talked before about some of the cases being brought by former NFL players. I don't know that that's so much malpractice as, you know, dealing with the injuries they've had to their head and whether or not they were told of that. Joan Rivers case, some of the others. Is there any other trend in malpractice law or any new type of cases that are coming up that are changing the law in any way? I don't, just maybe not. Maybe it's always the same.
Yeah, well, you know, of course, we've talked about the cases involving the sex clinics.
Yeah,
right. You and I, you reported on
let's
one
talk
of those.
about those a bit. All right. When we did that story, and like I said, I've done several stories with Clint, interesting ones. They're consumer alert stories.
Correct.
Is what they are. Okay, there's all types of fertility clinics. You hear them sponsored all the time, right? On you know, sponsorships, or rather calling in and saying that you can call. They're on commercials on the radio, TV, and you can see it preys on guys' vanity. Not able to perform, we can help you.
I would say preys on men's insecurity about their ability to perform sexually. And what you're talking about are these clinics that advertise that they can solve erectile dysfunction through alternative measures, which, as we know, involves the use of syringes and injectables. But what's even becoming, I think, even more out there, you know, the wild, wild west of medicine, are these different treatments that they call like a Priapus shot and other types of treatments where they claim that they can enhance the red cell, the number of red cells in your penis to make it grow larger, and therefore you can become more of a stud in bed. I mean, that's what they're peddling to people, and you know, it's no problem for me until they hurt somebody. And then when they hurt somebody, then it becomes my business. And that's what I'm beginning to see more over these types of cases, where there's not as much regulation over that type of medicine.
Are those procedures accepted? I mean, I'm just wondering, are these just coming out of nowhere? Or are these maybe doctors who aren't really qualified to do this type of treatment, but it's an because there are treatments for impotency and that, right?
Correct.
That are legit, but they have to be done correctly.
Nick, there's a difference between a procedure being accepted and a procedure being acceptable.
Okay.
All right. There are procedures that doctors will allow to occur under, you know, they'll say, look, it's proper practice of medicine to do this, but it's not a procedure that most doctors would entertain as being acceptable to them because they think it has some danger associated with it. So you can't tell another doctor, look, you can't do this procedure if it's a procedure that physicians can do. But what you can say is that's not a procedure I would do, and I'm going to be, you know, most doctors look at it and say, I'm going to be very, very critical of anything that happens when a patient gets injured. You know, I'm going to be willing to testify that that's a departure from the standard of care if you hurt somebody.
That makes sense. Well, we did that story on a gentleman who his genitals were destroyed.
Exactly, and you had a Vanderbilt urologist who was very critical of it.
Yeah. Let's take a call. Lines again open, 737-7587. Let's go to Joe. Joe, good morning, my friend.
Good morning, Nick.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for calling.
Mr. Kelly.
Go ahead.
Joe.
I just want to, first thing, is commend Mr. Kelly for bringing this forward and having the expertise to take care of these problems. But one of the things that's disturbing to me, and that you kind of touched on it kind of lightly, and I understand why, because a lot of them advertise on your station and other stations. A lot of these guys are doctors of chiropractic, and they are selling all kinds of different cures. And you've touched on just one of them, but they're involved in a lot of other cures. And, you know, I have a feeling that I don't know a doctor of chiropractic is qualified to do this kind of services they're offering out there, and it's kind of reminds me of the old snake oil salesman back in the early days of medicine. So just a little bit of comment on that, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
I have been waiting for the day, Nick, when a case comes in from someone who has been offered a treatment by a chiropractor that goes beyond the bounds of what's reasonable, and a patient gets hurt. What Joe's mentioning, I remember going to a chiropractor's office and seeing a brochure of 10 different things that the chiropractor could cure. And it started with nausea and vomiting, migraine headaches, the flu, a whole host of things that you wouldn't think somebody that manipulates spines could fix. Now, this was just one chiropractor, but it seems to me when you look at there's some commercials now about weight loss, and the person who's peddling the weight loss treatment is a chiropractor. If it works, it works. It's just, I wonder at some point if someone's going to go too far and hurt somebody for some type of treatment like that. It hadn't happened yet, but Joe's suspicion is it's interesting to know how that's going to play out over time.
Yeah, see, that's interesting. Now, we can agree that chiropractors, when they're working within the realm of what they do, help people. Right. I have friends of mine who go to chiropractors and swear by them.
I was going to use the same word. I swear by them.
Yeah, but whether you're dealing with a chiropractor, a conventional, MD, or maybe someone who specializes in acupuncture. I've been to an acupuncturist before, and the acupuncturist I've gone to makes certain claims or whatever, and I don't know if it actually helped or not. Maybe it helps more in my own head believing it, but it's one thing if you're going to someone and they're not delivering maybe on their promise, so you think, well, you know what, it's not worth the money. But if they're not harming you, then you don't really have a malpractice case. If you want to find something, if it reaches the level of fraud, you can go after them on that. But if they're making claims and it just doesn't work, that's not enough to be malpractice.
It is not, and that's not the type of case I would take. That's more of a breach of contract action.
Okay.
Joe's not talking about the vast majority of chiropractors who help people every day. I mean, I have a paralegal, couldn't get to the office without seeing a chiropractor.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know they do good work. Joe's talking about this small minority of them that offer treatments for conditions that don't seem to be anywhere within the realm of chiropractic. It's as you said, it appears to be like snake oil. And so I'm just wondering at some point whether someone's going to get hurt because the treatments go beyond what is actually acceptable within chiropractic, and a patient gets hurt real bad.
Okay, so you haven't really seen one of those. You haven't had a case involving a chiropractor.
Not yet.
Have you had cases, any other unusual ones? It's almost always a medical doctor?
Almost always, or a doctor of osteopathy.
What about a psychiatrist?
Have had one of those before.
Have you? I'm just curious because we've never really touched on that before in terms of someone dealing with mental health and maybe some of the prescriptions that go with that. What was that about?
I had a patient who was, actually it was his parents who brought the claim. It was a young man who went to a mental hospital and was under care of a psychiatrist for suicidal ideation, was threatening to kill himself. Yeah. And this psychiatrist let the patient out way too early. And after the patient got out for about 24 hours, he killed himself. And the claim was that doctor did not properly treat this patient while he was in the hospital, and therefore the patient committed suicide. I had another case with a young man who was in a hospital and hung himself.
Now, was it okay? I was going to say that one seems more clear cut to me. I've actually done a story on a case where there was someone who was clearly suicidal, and before he was taken to be incarcerated for a crime he was going to be charged with, he was taken to the hospital, was said to be on suicide watch, and whatever happened.
It's 15-minute or quarterly checks during the hour,
okay,
which
so
this patient did not get. That for whatever reason, and it was more of a claim against the hospital than it was against the psychiatrist, but he did not get his 15-minute checks, and took a shirt, wrapped it around the top of the pole, or the whatever that. There's some kind of, they had some kind of like thing you could hang your shirt on, and he wrapped it around his neck and hung himself.
So is that a malpractice case?
It is. It would be against the hospital and the staff who are responsible for performing the quarterly checks.
How often do you end up litigating cases as opposed to settling?
Probably 75 settling, 25 going to trial.
And how do you make the decision on that? I mean, there's a lot of factors, I guess.
A whole lot, but usually it comes down to dollars.
Okay, so now have you gone to a client before and said, this is the offer, what do you think? I think it's the best deal we can get. And they say, no, I want to go to trial?
I have. I've had situations where I've gone to the client and I said, I think you can get more money.
And they say, no, I
don't
want to go.
No, the clients agree with me and we go to trial.
Does the client always agree with you?
Not always, but sometimes, well, usually the client agrees with me, but sometimes the difference involves dollars, and that's usually the trigger of whether or not you go to trial.
I thought I remember you telling me once there was one where you highly recommended taking the settlement. and it was a good one, you thought, and the client, for whatever reason, said, no, I want this to go to trial, and you went and he didn't win.
Yeah, it was a $2 million offer left on the table. You know, you always tell the client in that situation, I mean, you have to give your best judgment, but at the end of the day, the client is the boss, Nick. I mean,
right.
you have to adhere to the client's wishes, but what I always tell them in that situation, there's no longer walk than the walk from the courthouse to your car when you left $1 million on the table and lost.
Mm-hmm.
That should not be used as an excuse not to go to trial, because there are cases that deserve to be tried, but it's a point where you have to be cautious and maybe take a pause and reflect, am I doing the right thing when I have that kind of money laying out there for me?
In situations like this, is it a principal thing for the client, or is it that, I mean, I'm just wondering, he hires you because he trusts your expertise, you're very good at what you do, and yet he still chose to forge ahead even though against maybe your recommendation. Was it a principal thing, or did he just truly think he was going to win more money in court?
I think actually it was both. But you know, when you look at the principal, this particular client that I had the most profound respect for, and he did it, and he manned up, he took the loss, and you know, he took it like a man.
He knew what
you know
the
what
risks
I mean?
were. It wasn't like he was blinded, and he knew what you had said.
And I have the most profound respect for him, so I don't want to sit there and say, well, it's about dollars and principle, and he didn't care. He knew exactly what he was doing, but he manned up and he took a chance, and sometimes you got to, Nick.
Yeah. Sometimes
you just have to take a chance. If you take a loss, you take a loss. But you know, if you know what you're doing and you man up over it, then that's far better than you know, taking a coward's check.
Yeah.
You know what I mean by that?
I understand, and that's interesting that you say that to me. I can see some people going that way, and I respect him for that.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work out, he has to accept the verdict the way it was.
I mean, everything was signed off, and like I said, he knew what he was doing, and he was anything but a coward. I'll tell you that.
Okay, but hospitals will settle sometimes. You've had some cases that I would think, for instance, that one that we talked about earlier with the baby, and we're going to have to go to a break, but some are pretty much slam dunk, are they not?
But, well, I hate to say
I
that
know
there's
you do,
such a
but
thing
I'm
as
sorry,
slam dunk. That's as close as it gets. You're right about that. And in that situation, it's going to be a case that more likely than not will get resolved. That's a high degree of.
I gotcha. All right, we'll take a break. When we come back, we'll take some calls when we come back. If you want to join us after this long break, Clint Kelly, malpractice attorney. Have you been wronged by a doctor or a hospital? We'll talk after this. Stay with us.